Hey gamers, I have a build video for you today, and this one is the Cosmic Kate Bishop build. Let's have a look. Alright gamers, we're going to take a look at Kate Bishop's primary skill tree to sort of make sure that we understand some of the basics of playing as the character. So the light combo finisher is square 4 times, so let's go ahead and take a look at that. And that's doing cosmic damage in this case. You notice that at the very end with that flourish. And that's because of my sword. So definitely if you have gear that's doing a certain type of damage, you need to know which attacks to use to get that elemental damage out there. Now the next thing is my favorite thing about Kate Bishop that differentiates her from the typical Clint Barton Hawkeye. He has Implosion Arrow, whereas Kate here has the Smokescreen Arrow, which is exactly what it says it is. It does stun damage and breaks block. So it's high stun damage and will stagger enemies, and it'll fill up that stun meter really fast. And if it doesn't, you could just fire off a second one and get that stun meter up the rest of the way. And it can really confuse enemies, and while they're stuck in that cloud, you can shoot some arrows in there and get some free hits on enemies that won't be able to fight back, or you can rush in with your sword. There's also an aerial version of the Smokescreen Arrow called Fade Away. And then we have our sprinting attack, Turn of Fate. And then we have our dodging attack here. So after an evade, you press square, and it actually spins the enemy around. So that's actually really nice. Then you have a light combo finisher that you can do in the air, which can knock back enemies. And of course, just like the light combo finisher, the damage increases with every hit. So 1, 2, 3, and that does cosmic damage, right? Because it's a light combo finisher. You got the Smokescreen Arrow. You can trigger it in the air if you want. You got the sprinting attack. So it does kind of a swipe that spins the enemy around, and then of course that opens you up to do combos where the enemy won't be able to strike back, right? So that's very powerful. Those are some very powerful moves. Okay, so looking at the heavy attacks now, pressing triangle 3 times allows us to do the Vorpal Blade, which is a heavy combo finisher. It can stagger, launch, and slam enemies. So triangle. So 1, 2, 3. Very simple, right? And it does quite a bit of damage directly in front of Kate. Now, this is essentially Kate Bishop's form of Bag of Tricks. So if you've watched my Hawkeye video, then you know that if you hold triangle, you start firing off these arrows without having to aim, and different types of arrows. Well, with Kate, she exclusively uses these demolition charge arrows here. And after you shoot an arrow, as you can see in this little video here, you have to hold L2 and press square to detonate the arrow. They can be manually detonated. So that breaks block, it does high damage, high impact, medium stun, and can launch enemies. So not only can you just fire the one, like you see here in this video, and of course it's an attack that you don't have to aim, right? You're just going to press triangle, and it's going to automatically seek out enemies. As you can see here, as you're pressing triangle 3 more times, Kate is, you know, depending on kind of like where you're aiming and orienting your character, you can sort of pivot like she does and sort of target the other enemies to the left of this riot bot there. So you're able to do that. And then you can, of course, L2 and square to detonate all of them and knock the enemies back. And of course, if your arrows here, because this is a power attack, if you have, for example, some gear here, power attacks inflict cosmic damage, then that means that your arrows here in the demolition charge arrow demolitions expert thing here, these will deal cosmic damage. So let's take a look. So yeah, these arrows, it's firing off these kind of yellow arrows, dealing some cosmic damage. and then boom, they explode. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Just like that. And you can detonate them. So that becomes very powerful, and that makes you want to seek out a certain type of gear, if you know what I mean. You want to definitely find stuff that applies an element to power attacks, especially if you want to take advantage of this in the same way that you want to take advantage of Bag of Tricks for Hawkeye. So you have a sprinting attack here called Piercing Blade. This does a lot of stun damage and can stagger enemies. It's a really great, this one's fine because you can spin enemies. This is the light sprinting attack, but this heavy one, boy, that one is a really great introduction into combat. Really lunges in there and does a lot of stun damage. And then you can follow that up with other attacks, right? So you have Plunging Blade, which almost does the same thing. It's just another stab move, but you're doing this after doing an evasion. So after pressing circle, for example. This does high damage, high impact, medium stun, and can cause enemies to stumble. So yeah, all you gotta do is dodge in some way, and then boom, triangle, and you can do that stab. Really great. So looking at this, you have the heavy combo finisher here. So square, 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 triangle. Breaks block, high damage, high impact, high stun, and can slam enemies. It's a very powerful attack here. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Just like that. So that's a heavy combo finisher. Now, Wings of Damascus. This is really cool. This is a mid-air attack. And as you can see, Kate is kind of jumping a little bit towards the enemy, but when you press triangle in mid-air, it sort of automatically seeks out the nearest enemy there and then slams onto that enemy there. So this can be really good and really, really great to use in aerial combat. Equalizer here is just sort of emphasizing the fact that you could start the demolition charge arrow in midair if you want to. The same way you can start Hawkeye's Bag of Tricks in midair. Boom. There you go. Just like that. So that can be a good strategy depending on if you're trying to evade enemies and, you're just trying to have this skill of not getting hit, right? While you're doing moves like that. Okay, so Kate Bishop has razor arrows in the same way that Hawkeye has razor arrows. These are your standard basic arrows. She does fire these pretty quick, though. And some of the things we should point out is that she also has a perfect draw, which, I'll emphasize this here. As soon as the crosshair turns purple, while you're charging it up, you want to let go of the arrow at the right time. There you go. If you wait until it's fully charged, you're going to set out the disruption arrow, which we're going to showcase that in combat. Now, what we should know about the disruptor arrow here is that when Hawkeye uses it, and we talk about it in the Hawkeye video, so definitely reference the Hawkeye video if you want to see the way that he uses it, because the way Kate uses it is very powerful, and so Hawkeye can benefit from it as well. So with Kate, it's all about just fully charging an arrow, a typical razor arrow, and then it debuffs any targets hit by the arrow. The debuff lasts for 6 seconds and increases ranged critical attack chance from any source by 25%. So breaks block, medium damage, high impact, medium stun, staggers enemies, and basically what you can see, it's putting that little marker around the enemy's head. Which means if people get crits on that weak spot, if people are shooting it or throwing their shield or the hammer or whatever it takes to get those hits right there, shooting arrows at it, it's going to give you that increased critical attack chance there. So that's like pretty much guaranteed crit attack damage there. So continuing to charge the arrow a second time to have it pierce through multiple targets, applying the disruption buff to all targets hit by it. So it basically allows the arrow to pierce. And so I think that's the example now that this arrow is fully charged and it's going to really pierce through there. So if you wait until the arrow is, boom, really lit on fire there, that's how you know it's like, it's doing that trick shot is what it's called. So getting the extra penetration there. Scatter shot arrows are basically Kate's version of Hawkeye's cluster arrows. But where Hawkeye uses them as sort of a tripwire type thing, Kate is really just firing arrows in bulk here. So here it starts out where it's firing 3 arrows in a horizontal fan. So think of this as your shotgun, you know. This is a good way to get a spread on lots of enemies that are closing in on you. Now, if you hold it, you can actually mark enemies. And as you're seeing, there's this sort of purple marker that's showing up on these 3 different enemies here. And you can mark a single target multiple times if you want. But if the targets move too far away or are off screen, it'll break that lock on targeting. So mark a target 3 times with Archer's Mark. Will trigger a knockback reaction on the enemy when hit with fully charged scatter shot arrows. So that can be very powerful. And one thing that I've done with, so there's the triple shot right there. That's just your standard one. And then fully charging it, you let go. There you go. Now, one thing you can do in the skill tree is you can actually go over, we'll talk about this later in the mastery tree, but you can actually add 2 more arrows. So instead of it firing 3, it fires 5, which as an archer, I've done some archery. It's pretty hard to fire 5 arrows. That's a lot to hold on to in your hand. That's very high skill stuff. And to actually have them be somewhat accurate would also be the other issue. Okay, so moving on. Scattershot arrows are very powerful. They're really cool. So Kate has her own kind of version of explosive arrows in the same way that Hawkeye sort of has, you know, a semi-explosive arrow there. But as you can see, you have to arc the shots on these, and the longer you hold R2 to draw it back, you know, the more straight and true the arrow is going to fly. If you continue holding it down and fully charge the arrow, you increase the explosive payload on the arrow, resulting in a larger blast radius. So as well as it being more accurate, you just get a larger blast radius. So it's a very slow charge time. It breaks block, high damage, high impact, high stun, causes enemies to fly back. It's very powerful. And then you have the high yield upgrade, which just increases the blast radius. So that's just a good upgrade to go through. Now the intrinsic ability here is quantum energy that is used to power select attacks as well as various movement abilities. So this is what's really distinguishing Kate from Clint. So of course you have your typical parry here, just pressing R2 as an enemy attack hits, and you'll parry. Now something you can do with her is she sort of uses this quantum ability here to do quantum lift. So pressing square after you parry with R2 allows you to follow up with a light counter attack here. And she teleports behind the enemy, does high stun damage. It can launch the enemy. That's very powerful. So you have another one. This is the heavy counter attack, where you press triangle after a successful parry with R2, right? High damage, high impact, low stun, but can stumble enemies, and it also breaks block. So this can be great when a shielded enemy is attacking you. You can deal with them. And it fires off, notice this, it shoots a shockwave of energy. Now that shockwave of energy, we're going to look into this later in the build, but it's the same type of energy as you see in the ultimate here with the quantum scythe. So it's kind of a cool thing when you actually pull that off. It's kind of really cool. Kind of lets you do that attack, and that shockwave can actually go through that enemy, and you notice it hits the enemy behind this shielded enemy as well. See that? So they both got stumbled and knocked down. Pretty cool. All right, over here we have the Quantum Blitz. Holding R2 and pressing square, you can teleport over to enemies and attack them with a sword strike. There's a 10% increased chance to inflict critical attack damage. Now that's important because there's going to be some perks later on in the mastery skill tree that will allow us to up that critical attack damage chance there. So we'll be able to take that from 10% to even more later on. So let's keep this in mind here. And it also breaks block and spins the enemy. So that's very powerful. And of course, after you hold R2, you could just press square twice once you've unlocked this perk. So obviously it gets better there. To execute a series of follow-up teleport attacks on the target, each with a 5% higher chance of dealing critical damage than the previous attack. So that's some stacking damage right there. Some stacking critical damage here. The last hit in the combo counts as a light combo finisher. So that, in my case, that's going to apply some cosmic damage because of the sword I'm using. So this breaks block as well and spins and knocks the enemy back. So it's obviously better to hit square a few times after doing your holding R2 and you're teleporting there. So yeah, this is a very powerful move. All right. So the Quantum Saber, you can hold R2 to teleport and then press triangle to teleport above the enemy, plunging the sword downwards at the target, slamming him into the ground, creating a shock wave that staggers surrounding enemies. So this breaks block, high damage, high impact, high stun, slam and stagger reactions there. So this is really powerful stuff. And then over here, we're just sort of buffing this quantum ability here. And of course, this is the way that you refill the intrinsic meter, is just by attacking enemies to build up the overcharge meter. Once it's full, the intrinsic quantum energy is constantly refilled for a short period of time. Getting hit drains all the energy. So you want to be teleporting a lot. You want to be dodging, but mostly parrying and teleporting, right? Because you want to avoid being hit, but you also want to get in as many hits as possible. So duration here is 5 seconds. Intrinsic energy rapidly regenerates. This gives you a lot of power. Hey gamers, if you're finding this video helpful or informative, please give us a like. Much appreciated. Alright, let's look at Kate's specialty tree. So her support heroic ability here, you hold L1 to aim and then release and throw a miniature hologram projector. The projector displays a hologram of the wielder, distracting enemies from attacking actual heroes. Through an infusion of quantum energy, the projector can create actual quantum arrows that it shoots at nearby targets, providing additional offensive support. So this lasts for 15 seconds. And of course, while the decoy is deployed, you can press L1 to create a quantum bridge. So you're teleporting to where the projection is, and then the projection is switching places with you. So it's kind of interesting. You can change where that enemy is, or you can appear there and start attacking. It's really cool. So yeah, definitely keep these abilities in mind. Extending the duration of the decoy by 10 more seconds, so now it's 25 seconds. If you hold L1 while the decoy is deployed, you can detonate it, creating a large explosion that damages nearby enemies. So this breaks block, does high damage, high impact, medium stun, and the reaction causes enemies to fly back. That can be powerful if you just choose that all the enemies are swarmed around it. You want to detonate it early. There's actual benefits towards doing that. So triggering after image regenerates willpower and intrinsic energy. So after image is when you're creating that quantum bridge and you're teleporting, you're switching places with the projection. So that can be helpful. You can also choose that the decoy rapidly fires 3 shots at the target before moving on to the next one, which increases total damage against each enemy. So depending on whether I need health or not, I'm oftentimes switching between these two, but I really like that this gives you willpower and intrinsic energy, which opens you up to be able to do more things. So Heroes standing near the decoy are granted the benefits of the Shadow Jacket ability, which reduces incoming damage by 35%. The buff duration is 3 seconds. So this can be a powerful ability, and there's another part in the tree here that uses the Shadow Jacket ability. So, you know, if that's something you like, you can potentially have it in multiple places. All right, so other options here. If you trigger the decoy to self-destruct, this will refund some of your support heroic energy. The sooner the drone is detonated after deployment, the larger the amount of energy refunded. It just makes sense. It's obviously using up heroic energy while it's out there, and if you choose to detonate it early, then obviously you won't use up so much of that energy. It just makes sense. So there's reasons to do that, and there's benefits, right? All right, so looking at this, the probability matrix, I actually like this quite a bit. The decoy alternates between firing quantum arrows and charged quantum arrows, which detonate on impact, launching nearby enemies into the air. So, I mean, you want your decoy to set you up to be able to do combos with your sword or shoot at enemies with your bow. You know, you want that to be a distraction and also something that helps out the team. Healing Light. There's a 20% chance that the decoy will generate regen packs as it deals damage. Defeating enemies with the drone increases this chance. So this can be very helpful if, you know, you're looking to be sort of the healer of the team. You can obviously equip that perk, and you can equip this perk, which it's not unusual for me to do that sometimes, especially if there's not like a Hawkeye or a Kamala, Miss Marvel on the team that's able to do some healing. You know, my Kate Bishop, I can switch up the build depending on if I'm playing with other players or not. All right, the Assault Heroic ability is Warp Arrow, and this one's kind of crazy. So you hold R1 to aim, and you release to fire an arrow that teleports you to the point of impact. So wherever you aim, you're pretty much going to teleport there. It creates a quantum explosion that deals damage to all the nearby enemies, launching them into the air. If you press R1 while the arrow is still in flight, you can trigger the teleportation early. So this breaks block, it does high damage, high impact, high stun, and launches enemies. It's a very powerful thing. Now, this here, excess quantum energy from the warp arrow is converted into a quantum shroud, which temporarily absorbs 20% of incoming damage. Now, you'll often find perks on gear that will actually give you quantum shroud, which I would almost think of it like Jarvis barrier. I would almost put it in the same league as something like that. So it can be powerful, and just getting Shadow Jacket here by default is quite good. And of course, we saw that you could get Shadow Jacket with the decoy as well, and you can also get it over here with the Cloak of Oblivion. But we're going to talk about that in a second. Increases the Assault Heroic meter charge rate by 15%. So that's just good. You're just going to be getting... I feel like I get this arrow very often. So you have here where you can store a second charge for the Warp Arrow, and you also have it on this side. So you could potentially store 2 extra slots of Warp Arrow, and that's usually what I do. But I feel like I get it back so frequently that I may not need those extra charges. So this is Wormhole. This is really only useful if you're actually playing with physical other players, like people that will actually use these portals, because I don't think I've ever seen the AI characters actually utilize these. So wherever the destination arrow goes, it's creating a portal once you warp there, and then from wherever you fired the arrow is your entrance portal. So you can have teammates walk through those. Now, why that's important? Because with this perk over here that's across from it, the Cloak of Oblivion, this increases the duration of Shadow Jacket ability generated when using the Warp Arrow by 2 seconds. Teammates using the Wormhole will receive the benefits of Shadow Jacket. So, pretty interesting, huh? So it increases the duration of Shadow Jacket generated when using the Warp Arrow by 2 seconds. But you have to be using it with the wormhole, pretty much. I mean, it just wouldn't make sense otherwise. You'd want to share those benefits with your team. The Warp Arrow, this is the singularity. This is a lot of fun. The Warp Arrow no longer teleports the wielder to the impact location. Instead, creates a gravity well that pulls in nearby enemies. So you can use this as maybe you could rush in and do some sword attacks on the enemies. But what I recommend is to probably pelt them with some arrows. Hit them with Kate's demolition charge arrows here, where you don't even have to aim. Just get some free shots of that while they can't even move, So after the quantum energy depletes, the warp arrow explodes, damaging nearby enemies. So it breaks block, it does high damage, causes enemies to flinch and fly back. So very helpful. On this side, you can actually increase the damage inflicted by warp arrow by 15%. So it already does a lot of like knockback damage, already does very high damage, high impact, high stun, launches enemies. It's already very powerful on its own. So you can make it absolutely ridiculous if you want to do this. But how I used to do it was I would typically just have more charges. But I'm enjoying tinkering around with different setups here, and I just recommend that you use the perks in tandem typically. All right, so moving on to the ultimate heroic, Quantum Overdrive. So once you initiate this, it overflows and powers up all your ranged and melee attacks, and you hold R2 until the arrows are fully charged with energy for even greater arrow effectiveness. So it's obviously showcasing here that you can fire off these like awesome purple arrows that if they're fully charged will launch enemies instead of staggering them. And the damage and impact goes from medium to high if you charge up the arrows. You got the Quantum Shroud here, so it's an energy field that absorbs 20% of incoming damage for the duration of the skill. Quantum energy extends around the sword, increasing the damage and impact of all sword attacks. So melee damage increased by 15%. Increased impact to all melee damage. Extends the duration of Quantum Overdrive by 10 seconds. So now it's 30 seconds, right? And now if we look over here, you have the ability to use Quantum Storm, which is where you're just going to fire these energy bolts like really rapidly, as you can see on the screen there. And you can trigger quantum detonation if enough bolts are embedded into a single combatant, and you just kind of hold R2 to fire there. So that can be very powerful. But what I like is the Quantum Scythe, as we showcased earlier when we were looking at the primary skill tree. This breaks block, does medium damage, medium impact, medium stun, normal reaction, but it's really great because you can pelt a boss with this, you can take out lots of weak enemies with this, and it penetrates through. These energy projectiles, they remind me of Guile's like sonic booms and stuff, and there's also a sword in Destiny that does this same type of thing where it just fires out this beam of damage there that can just shred through enemies. So I really like this. I think it's fun. But yeah, it just comes down to like, what do you need in this situation? Are you really going for a range type thing? Are your enemies further away? Are you fighting a boss? Would it be more effective to hit them with arrows than it would to get up close, or try to do this from a little bit of range, which you certainly can. Looking at the last thing, Quantum Overdrive, while it's active, you can use the blink jump, or blink dash, and those abilities will create small energy explosions. It does high stun damage and staggers, but like I've never really found this as like, I've like never really used this and was like, wow, this really helped me. Like, not when there's things like this that's really powerful, or this that's also really powerful. Alright, so on this side you have the Quantum Flux, which defeating enemies while Quantum Overdrive is active grants an immediate boost of willpower and regenerates additional willpower over time. So that can be beneficial as a way to get willpower back. But I like this one because Assault Heroic Energy builds 50% faster while Quantum Overdrive is active. So that means I'm going to be getting Warp Arrow back very quickly. So I like that. This one right here, damage from all Quantum Energy infused attacks is increased by 10% while Quantum Overdrive is active. So that means, that's pretty much everything, right? that's any of this stuff in this column here. That also counts for a lot of your intrinsic abilities. Are gonna have big benefits from this right here. So this can be really powerful. It just depends what you want. Do you want to have your Warp Arrow back more frequently, or do you want to just do like a ridiculous amount of quantum damage here? Now, what I should bring up here with Kate is that she can blink here to climb ledges. She can do a blink jump, which you can do repeatedly, and she can also do a blink dash. These teleportation things are really handy for traversal. So that's your typical jump there. You can do that, and you can use it to like clear gaps like that if you're making big jumps and stuff. It's very helpful. Now, let's say we're on the ground and I need to get up to a platform here. I can just do R2 and X, and quickly I can spam that a few times until I run out of my quantum energy bar there, which you already see it's refilling already. And then now I can do R2 and circle to do like a horizontal dash like that. So I can use that to clear gaps as well. And don't forget, if you fall, you can always just look up and press X if you're like somewhat near a ledge, like so, and sort of make the jump. So let's say I use up all my energy, I can do that to make it the rest of the way. If I were to use up all my quantum energy, see, I can do that. So don't forget to use these clever traversal things. Use these during combat. While you're fighting enemies, you're doing lots of slashing. You know, you can quickly work in some of the teleporting attacks, or you can quickly teleport out, use that to dodge out of a situation, right? Or you can use it to get up in the air and then get out your bow and shoot some arrows. There's so many possibilities for that. Okay, so that kind of wraps up our talk about the specialty tree, and we'll move on to the mastery tree next. Hey gamers, if you're finding this video helpful or informative, please give us a like. Much appreciated. Alright, now we're into the nitty gritty here. This is Kate Bishop's mastery tree. So we have some melee perks. Flying solo increases critical attack damage while juggling enemies in the air by 20%. I think this is pretty easy. She has a lot of attacks that launch enemies into the air, and then you can just be up there and just slash them up. Do the light combo finisher, press square 3 times. That's pretty easy. I highly recommend that one. You can also increase the critical attack damage of sprint and dodge attacks by 15%. That can be useful too. I often will switch between these based on what my gear is and what type of attacks I think I'm using more often. Shot Taker here, this is kind of a noob perk is what I would say. Like it's really only good as you're learning the character, if you really need something to hold your hand here. Decreasing the impact of enemy attacks at the start of a signature attack, reducing the chance of being interrupted. So eventually these perks will deal more damage at the end of the day, whereas this is just like giving you training wheels to make sure that your signature attacks are not interrupted, right? And the smokescreen arrow, dude, like if you're in the air, or if you're triggering this at the right time, or you can do a dodge before or after it, and she kind of jumps back like that, which sort of automatically evades most attacks from enemies and damage. Like, boy, that the perk here in the mastery tree, this perk is so useless. I really hate it. I don't think it's helpful at all. Alright, so next, increase the stun damage of all melee attacks by 10%. I think that's very powerful, and I will often equip that one. But right now I've been going for increasing the damage of all combo finishers by 15%. because Kate, she attacks so fast. Looking at her light combo finisher, this is a very quick attack. It's very quick and easy to press square 4 times. And then if you're trying to do the heavy combo finisher, this one's very quick as well. And it does so much damage and breaks block and stuff. It's very powerful. So here, increase the damage dealt by the explosion on the demolition charge arrows by 10%. So if you're using those demolition charge arrows, which, like I said, that's going to be these right here. So oftentimes I'll equip that too, and especially now that I'm dealing cosmic damage, it makes a lot of sense. So this is often a perk that I will change up just based on what my build is and what I'm doing. So if I'm wanting to do more stun damage so I can get more takedowns, which is typically my go-to, I'll do that. So yeah, this perk is this changes based on your gear. So just remember it's there. As usual here, you can generate an intrinsic orb from takedowns, or a heroic orb, or a regen pack, and I usually go for heroic orbs because I want to be using my heroics as much as possible, and I love to do takedowns. So, since my razor arrows here are currently doing gamma damage, I have chosen to mostly buff that specific arrow type. But if I had some gear that was, scatter shot arrows were dealing, sonic damage, for example, which I think would be awesome. I actually have that build on PC. That can be really useful. But since we have what we have here, this one's doing a 10% additional bonus damage, and the impact is increased from low to medium. So that's pretty powerful. Now, if you have scatter shot arrows, this will reduce the spread, making it easier to hit a single target with multiple arrows. So that's really good. This one here increases the stun damage of the explosive arrows by 15%. So it just depends what you have. Do you have gear that's applying an element to certain types of arrows? Do you want to mix and match and potentially use multiple things? Pin cushion here. Trick shot will now pin a single enemy instead of passing through targets. Pinned enemies will remain stuck to walls, floors, and ceilings for several seconds until they are able to break free. So if you don't want that penetration, you want to pin enemies, then you can use this, and sometimes that's helpful. Increasing the damage of fully charged scatter shot arrows by 5% for each mark on the target. So when you're getting those 3 lock-on targets there, that's an extra 15% damage right there. That's very powerful. So I'll switch these out based on what I want to do. Reduce the time it takes to fully draw and charge the explosive arrows by 20%. Those arrows are really slow to draw because it's a heavy explosive arrow. You have to really pull it back. So this perk can be really useful. So it just depends. If you don't want to pin enemies, then I recommend just not having this perk equipped. Now, you have quick draw. So when you perform the perfect draw, which we talked about earlier, that's about charging the arrow and releasing it when the crosshair turns purple. If you do that on all 3 shots of the range combo with razor arrows, it will trigger the quick draw buff. Hold down L2 and R2 to use the buff and instantly charge up the next shot for any arrow type. Now, with this, you can ready and fire 2 additional arrows when using scatter shot arrows. This is very powerful. So if you have something like sonic damage on scatter shot arrows, this will up it from firing 3 scatter shot arrows to firing 5. It's absolutely ridiculous and highly recommended. Right here, you have range power attacks with explosive arrows. Will instead shoot a demolition charge arrow. Demolition charge arrows, as we know here, if we go back to here, this is the demolition charge arrows, right? And it's a power attack, so that means it's dealing cosmic damage. So one thing to point out here, these attached to surfaces have a time delayed proximity triggered explosive arrowhead that launches targets into the air when detonated. So for example, this would be really smart to choose this with my current build, because right here power attacks are doing cosmic damage. So let's switch to that arrow type and make sure. Okay. And you can trigger it. Well, I don't know that that's... Not sure that's... Let me double check here. So just because it's changing it... Okay, so it may not actually apply the damage type. Okay. So yeah, we're definitely going to stick with Quick Draw for now. Okay, intrinsic abilities. You can increase the max amount of the intrinsic quantum energy bar by 15%. But once again, I would rather have something else that allows me to regen that meter quicker. So I chose to increase the critical attack chance of light and heavy attacks by 15%. So that's all your teleporting attacks, right? Which I'm going to use all the time in combat when I'm up close. This is also handy if you want to use the blink, jump, and dash for traversal a lot. If you want to get around the environment fast and not use up lots of intrinsic energy while you're evading in combat using the blink dash potentially. You can equip this and that's very helpful. I've often used that. You can increase the max amount of intrinsic quantum energy that can be held. So that means, you could potentially, if you doubled up on these, you could increase it by 30%, which is wild. But I obviously chose to go for increased damage of the intrinsic attacks, which is, primarily me just like teleporting around, right? Teleporting around and doing sword slashes. Increases the rate at which the intrinsic energy regenerates by 30%. So a lot of times I will like to choose that just to get the intrinsic energy to come back. But I feel like it generates pretty quick on its own. And whenever I am out of intrinsic energy, I just do other attacks and let it come back naturally. But if it's something you need, this all comes down to preference and what your build is and what you're trying to accomplish with the character. So you can increase the max amount of intrinsic quantum energy a third time by 15%. So 15 plus 15 plus 15. If you were to stack all three of these, that's 45% boost to that quantum energy bar. So you're not going to be running out of quantum energy very quickly with that much of a bonus. Increase the stun damage of the intrinsic light and heavy attacks by 25%. So since I like doing stun damage in order to build up takedowns and stuff, I really love having this because that buffs it by 25%. You can reduce the intrinsic energy cost of the light and heavy attacks by 15%. Over here on the overcharge, you can reduce the amount of overcharge meter energy drained when taking damage by 20%. But I feel like you should just learn to minimize taking damage and apply a perk that actually gives you a better benefit. So defeating enemies while overcharged adds to the buff duration by 1 second. That can be helpful if you're able to kill a lot of enemies very rapidly. But I chose to go with the attacks increasing enemy status meters 10% faster. I think that's a very powerful perk as well. Increases the amount of overcharge meter energy gained from all combo finishers by 10%. If you're able to pull those off, then fine, you get your 10%. Increases the amount of overcharge meter energy gained from ranged critical attacks by 5%. That can be good if you're using arrows a lot. But I kind of like this. Collecting intrinsic orbs will gain 15 points of overcharge meter energy. So I guess it really just depends what you're doing. Are you primarily doing your light and heavy combo finishers, and then maybe that 10% bonus is for you. But yeah, if you're not dropping intrinsic orbs and your teammates are not dropping intrinsic orbs, then yeah, you might want to go for something else. You might want to go for something that's going to increase that meter quickly, right? So that's just personal preference, and I will often switch these. Obviously right now, because I have the sword that's really good for the light combo finishers, and I'm doing that a lot when I am in close combat, this would probably be quicker than hoping for an intrinsic orb to drop. Critical attack chance of melee attacks is increased by 10% when overcharged. You could go for a ranged attack damage increased by 10% when overcharged, which is usually what I'm doing. Usually when I'm overcharged, it's hard to say. This just depends. This is all situational, but when I'm playing as Kate, I often opt for ranged attacks over sword attacks. That's why you can see my build is a little more range focused and heroic focused than it is melee focused. Then here, reduces damage taken by 10% while overcharged. I think you should just, that's such a, it's another perk that I just feel like, you should just learn to play the game the hard way and not have to rely on these baby buffs like this to help you play better. You should just take these buffs here that are going to actually cause you to deal more damage and not have to worry about taking damage because you're going to be dishing it out so much. Okay, so last thing we'll do is we'll look at gear, and then we'll do sort of a combat demo here. All right, so we've kind of hinted at it, but some of the gear that we have here, we've talked about it as we've gone through the build and some of the skill trees, kind of talked about things. So this sword I have here is actually really cool. I love this. Light combo finishers do cosmic damage. Power attacks, which means our demolition arrows there. That's an example of a power attack, right? That's doing, all these other ones are considered heavy attacks, but these are considered power attacks. So that's dealing cosmic damage. Plus we have a chance when hitting an enemy with a melee critical attack to activate Tachyon Surge. And that increases all status damage by 50% while active. And guess what we're going to be doing? While that's active, we're probably going to be doling out more cosmic damage. Or we're going to be using this arrow here. Our razor arrows are dealing gamma damage. Now here's what's weird about this exotic drop that I kind of don't get. I feel like this should have dropped with scatter shot arrows deal gamma. That would have made more sense. So I think I got screwed on this second perk here. Because the top perk says 10% increased firing speed of scattershot arrows and the aiming time of Archer's Mark, which was that lock-on ability that the scattershot arrows have. You can lock on to three body parts or 3 different enemies. 20% increased stun status and normal damage of scattershot arrows. So see, doesn't that seem weird that it's doing the gamma damage with the razor arrows instead of scattershot? So I think I got a little screwed on that one. Just going back here, this one was really cool because it increased the amount of gamma damage here, but obviously this one dropped low, so I can't get it up to power 140. It's stuck there. There's obviously this one here, quantum teleportation, intrinsic attacks deal status effect damage based on what type of melee status gear is equipped. So that means gamma. Heavy combo finishers do gamma. 15% increased quantum energy. So that's increasing your quantum energy bar even more. So potentially, instead of 45, you could have it up to 60% more quantum energy on your bar there. So here we have Tachyon's Eye, and this is really powerful because we have Cosmic with our arrows, with the demolition charge arrows, and with our light combo finishers. It's increasing the amount of willpower recovered from attacking cosmic afflicted enemies by 30%. The increase of the amount of cosmic damage dealt with any attack by 20%. That's very powerful. Once again, we're getting the Tachyon Surge again. So whether I'm parrying attacks or I'm hitting enemies with melee critical attacks, I'm doing it. I'm getting that. So here's another option that I potentially have. There's a damage reduction while Quantum Surge is active. I have a chance to automatically phase shift when taking damage. So that's like kind of like an automatic dodge. I just like dodge out of it, teleport out. 300% increased health and heroic energy while Quantum Surge is active, which is absolutely outrageous. That perk is incredible. So that could be really good. That could be another option. But because I'm sort of rolling with this cosmic build at the moment, this is obviously perfect. So once again, we have a chance when defeating enemies to activate a Tachyon Surge. And surges here increase all status damage by 50% when active. Now, I did get this cryo perk here that's buffing cryo damage by 20%, but I don't really have any cryo arrows at the time, so that would be a potential change that I can make to the build. I could either go over here and maybe use cosmic arrows and then sub this out for like a cryo sword. Just depends on what I want to do. If I really want to optimize this build even more. And then we have increased charge rate of the heroic ultimate ability by 18%. Once again, I chose the Tactagon because I want to buff all the status damage, the elemental damage, all these status effects that are happening to enemies. I want to buff that. Over here, I'm just buffing my heroic support and assault abilities, buffing the critical hit chance for signature attacks. So that's the smoke arrow. Then over here, you have increased damage from heavy combo finishers. That's fine. You know, usually here I'm just digging for things that are going to increase my ratings or are going to regenerate my heroics even faster. So that's usually what I'm going with when it comes to Kate Bishop. Now let's just look at a little showcase of how some of our arrows and stuff are working in builds. So there's the smoke screen. There's our cosmic arrows. We can detonate those. And of course you can teleport here to pull off your combos, confuse enemies. The light combo finisher dealt out some cosmic damage there. You can dodge to spin enemies around. Now you can do your decoy there. See how I dodged that attack and then detonated that? See, it buys me a lot of leeway here to like attack the enemies I need to attack. I can avoid damage quite easily, and my decoy is distracting enemies and protecting me. It can be very useful. So now there's the singularity. Once again, I would use that, as an opportunity to pelt your enemies with arrows, and you know, I just got so lucky that the drone exploded there. Now let's do the ultimate here and just showcase how boss that can be. And I can obviously do it at range too, right? I can back off a little bit and just let this shred through enemies at a distance, so I don't have to worry about getting caught in gas clouds or explosions or whatever it might be. So a pretty easy encounter right there. And there's our disruption arrow, which obviously kills weak enemies like that pretty easily. Oh, uh-oh. So I can teleport out to avoid a bad situation like that, which could have killed me, right? So you want to use that as a scapegoat, right? Use the smoke screen arrow to buy yourself some time to escape a situation, right? There you go. So Kate Bishop has some fast attacks. She can really escape and dodge out of certain situations, and that can make her very powerful in combat. So hopefully you found this helpful. And that's all for this video. Hopefully you found it helpful or informative. If so, give us a like, and we'll see you on the next one.